The year is 1945. Deep in the Austrian Alps, Nazi SS officers frantically dump crates into a mountain lake under cover of darkness. In the Philippine jungles, Japanese soldiers seal workers alive inside tunnels filled with billions in looted gold. Off the coast of Guam, 900 American sailors float in shark-infested waters while the Navy doesn't even notice they're missing. And somewhere in occupied France, a secret American unit is defeating German forces with nothing but rubber tanks and sound effects. These aren't scenes from a movie, these are real events from World War II, and the truth behind them remains shrouded in mystery to this day. For the next 30 minutes, we're diving into World War II's most fascinating mysteries, legends, and shocking facts. Stories that have been deliberately buried by governments, tragedies covered up by military brass, and treasures that might still be waiting to be found. Some of what you're about to hear seems too bizarre to be true, but it is. Let's dive in. The Nazi treasure of Lake Toplitz. Hidden deep in the Austrian Alps lies Lake Toplitz, a remote and eerily beautiful body of water that holds one of World War II's darkest secrets. This isn't just any lake, it's a natural vault that the Nazis used to hide some of their most valuable stolen treasure and their most damning secrets. Lake Toplitz is no ordinary lake. It sits at an altitude of over 2,000 feet, surrounded by sheer mountain cliffs that make access extremely difficult. But what makes it truly unique is its depth and composition. The lake is approximately 350 feet deep, and below about 60 feet, it becomes completely devoid of oxygen. This creates a perfect preservation environment where organic materials don't decompose normally, and more importantly, where diving becomes extremely dangerous. The Nazis discovered this remote location in 1943 and immediately recognized its potential. They established a secret naval testing station on the lake's shores, officially to test torpedoes and other weapons in alpine conditions, but that was just the cover story. What they were really doing there was far more sinister and far more valuable. As the war entered its final months and Nazi Germany began to collapse, SS officers started using Lake Toplitz as a dumping ground. According to eyewitness testimony from local residents, they saw trucks arriving at night, heavily guarded by SS troops. The soldiers would load boxes onto boats and row out into the middle of the lake, where they would dump their cargo into the dark waters below. But what were they dumping? The first clues came in 1959, when a German magazine sponsored an expedition to explore the lake. What they found was shocking: wooden crates containing millions of pounds worth of counterfeit British currency. This was part of Operation Bernhard, one of the Nazis' most ambitious schemes to destabilize the British economy by flooding it with fake money. Operation Bernhard was run by SS Major Bernhard Kruger and employed Jewish prisoners with printing and engraving skills in the Sachsenhausen concentration camp. These prisoners were forced to produce nearly perfect counterfeit British 5, 10, 20, and 50-pound notes. The operation was so successful that even the Bank of England had difficulty distinguishing the fakes from genuine currency. The Nazis produced an estimated 134 million pounds worth of counterfeit notes, an astronomical sum at the time. But the counterfeit money is just the tip of the iceberg. Local legends and testimony from former Nazi officers suggest that something far more valuable lies at the bottom of Lake Toplitz: gold. Lots of gold. According to these accounts, the Nazis dumped gold bars, jewelry, and other precious metals into the lake as Allied forces closed in. The estimated value runs into the hundreds of millions, possibly billions, of dollars. The Austrian government has authorized multiple expeditions to explore the lake, but each one has been fraught with danger. The lack of oxygen at depth creates toxic conditions, and the lake bottom is littered with debris, creating navigation hazards. In 1963, a diver died during an expedition, leading to increased restrictions on diving activities. In 2000, a major expedition using sophisticated sonar and remote-operated vehicles scoured the lake bottom. They confirmed the presence of numerous large objects in crates, but bringing them to the surface proved extremely difficult. The few crates they did recover contained more counterfeit currency and some documents, but no gold. The most tantalizing theory about Lake Toplitz involves not just treasure, but secrets. Some researchers believe the Nazis dumped documents into the lake records of Swiss bank accounts, where they had hidden looted assets, lists of Nazi collaborators in Allied countries, or evidence of secret deals made with various parties as the war ended. If such documents exist and have survived in the oxygen-free depths, they could rewrite history. The Austrian government has largely prohibited further diving expeditions in Lake Toplitz, officially due to safety concerns and environmental protection. But this has only fueled speculation that they know something is down there and don't want it found. Some conspiracy theorists suggest that certain European governments have a vested interest in keeping Lake Toplitz's secrets buried, particularly if documents naming collaborators or detailing hidden assets are involved. What we know for certain is that the Nazis used Lake Toplitz to hide something they desperately wanted to keep secret. The counterfeit currency alone proves that. But whether gold bars, stolen artwork, or damning documents also rest in those dark waters remains one of World War II's most enduring mysteries. The Ghost Army, America's secret weapon. While real soldiers were dying on the battlefields of Europe, a secret unit of the U.S. Army was winning battles with inflatable tanks, sound effects, and theatrical trickery. This isn't a legend. This is the absolutely true story of the Ghost Army, one of World War II's most successful and bizarre units. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, nicknamed the Ghost Army, was activated in 1944 with a mission that sounds like something out of a spy novel: deceive the German army using illusions, fake radio transmissions, and elaborate theatrical productions. The unit consisted of approximately 1,100 men, many of them artists, designers, sound engineers, and actors recruited from art schools and advertising agencies. Their toolkit was revolutionary for its time. They had inflatable rubber tanks, trucks, and artillery pieces that could be set up by a small team in just a few hours. From a distance or from the air, these decoys looked completely real. They created elaborate sound effects recordings of tanks moving, troops assembling, and equipment being operated that they would broadcast from massive speakers. They even had fake shoulder patches and unit insignia that they would wear when they went into nearby towns, spreading disinformation about which units were in the area. The Ghost Army conducted over 20 battlefield deceptions across France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and Germany. Between 1944 and 1945, their operations often took place within miles of the front lines, putting them in constant danger. If the Germans had discovered what they were really doing, they would have been executed as spies rather than treated as prisoners of war. One of their most successful operations was during the crossing of the Rhine River in March 1945. While the actual Ninth Army prepared to cross at one location, the Ghost Army set up an elaborate deception 15 miles south, creating the impression that two divisions were preparing to cross there instead. They inflated hundreds of rubber tanks and trucks, broadcast sounds of a major military buildup, and sent fake radio transmissions that they knew the Germans would intercept. The deception worked perfectly. German forces concentrated artillery and defensive positions at the fake crossing site, leaving the real crossing location more lightly defended. Thousands of American lives were potentially saved because German guns were pointed at rubber tanks instead of real ones. Another remarkable operation took place during the Battle of the Bulge. As the Germans launched their surprise offensive in December 1944, the Ghost Army was deployed to create the illusion that fresh American divisions were arriving as reinforcements much faster than they actually were. They moved their inflatable equipment from location to location, making it appear as though massive American forces were converging on the German breakthrough. The level of detail in these deceptions was extraordinary. The Ghost Army didn't just set up fake equipment, they created entire fake headquarters, complete with radio traffic, vehicle movements, and even fake laundry hanging out to dry. They would send soldiers into nearby towns in different unit patches to spread rumors. They studied German reconnaissance patterns and positioned their decoys exactly where they knew German observers would spot them. What makes the Ghost Army story even more remarkable is that it remained classified for over 40 years after the war ended. The soldiers involved were sworn to secrecy and couldn't tell anyone, not even their families, what they had really done during the war. It wasn't until 1996 that the operation was declassified, and many of the veterans finally got to share their extraordinary stories. The Ghost Army's success demonstrated something crucial about warfare. Perception can be as powerful as reality. By making the Germans believe American forces were larger and positioned differently than they actually were, the Ghost Army influenced German military decisions and saved countless lives. Some military historians estimate that the Ghost Army's operations may have saved between 15,000 and 30,000 American lives. After the war, many Ghost Army veterans went on to distinguished careers in art and design. Their ranks included fashion designer Bill Blass and painter Ellsworth Kelly. They brought the same creativity and innovation that had fooled the German army to their peacetime careers. Today, the Ghost Army is finally getting the recognition it deserves. There are documentaries, books, and even a push to award the unit the Congressional Gold Medal. Their story proves that sometimes the most effective weapon isn't a gun or a bomb, it's imagination, creativity, and the ability to make your enemy see what you want them to see, rather than what's actually there. The mystery of the Japanese gold lily treasure. As Japanese forces swept through Asia in the early 1940s, they didn't just conquer territory, they systematically looted the wealth of entire nations. Gold, platinum, diamonds, religious artifacts, artwork, and currency were stripped from banks, temples, palaces, and private homes across China, Indonesia, Malaysia, Burma, and the Philippines. The total value of this plunder was staggering, possibly reaching into the hundreds of billions in today's dollars. And according to persistent legends and some historical evidence, much of it was hidden in the Philippines and has never been recovered. This operation was codenamed Golden Lily, named after a poem written by Emperor Hirohito. The operation was allegedly overseen by Prince Chichibu, the emperor's brother, and involved the systematic collection and concealment of looted war treasure. The scale was unprecedented. Entire ships were filled with gold bars, Buddha statues, and precious gems stripped from occupied territories. As the tide of war turned against Japan in 1943, the problem became what to do with all this stolen wealth. Transporting it back to Japan became increasingly impossible as American submarines controlled the Pacific shipping lanes. According to the Golden Lily theory, the Japanese High Command made a decision. They would hide the treasure in the Philippines in an elaborate network of tunnels, caves, and underground chambers. The Philippines, they reasoned, would eventually be retaken by Japan after the war, allowing them to recover the hidden wealth. The story gets darker. According to some accounts, the tunnels where treasure was hidden were sealed with the engineers and laborers still inside, ensuring they could never reveal the locations. Some estimates suggest thousands of workers were entombed alive in these hidden chambers. The most famous account of Golden Lily comes from a Filipino locksmith named Rogelio Roxas. In 1971, Roxas claimed he discovered one of these treasure sites near Baguio City in the northern Philippines. According to his story, he found a tunnel system that led to a chamber containing a golden Buddha statue weighing over a ton and filled with diamonds. He also claimed to have found numerous gold bars. But Roxas's discovery, if true, brought him nothing but trouble. He alleged that Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos, who ruled as a dictator from 1965 to 1986, learned of the find and sent soldiers to confiscate the treasure. Roxas was arrested, tortured, and the gold was seized. The golden Buddha was never seen again. This incident led to one of the most bizarre legal cases in history. In 1988, Roxas's estate sued Ferdinand Marcos in a Hawaiian court, claiming theft of the treasure. In 1996, a jury awarded the Roxas estate $43 billion in damages, one of the largest judgments in legal history. However, collecting on this judgment proved impossible as the Marcos estate claimed it had no assets, and the Philippine government denied the treasure ever existed. The Marcos connection adds another layer to the mystery. During his presidency, Marcos somehow accumulated vast wealth despite his relatively modest government salary. The Marcos family's unexplained wealth has been estimated at anywhere from $5 billion to $10 billion. Some investigators believe this money came from recovered Golden Lily treasure, though the Marcos family has always denied this. The Philippine government's official position is that Golden Lily is a myth, and no such treasure exists. However, the government has also been known to seize and confiscate alleged treasure finds, claiming them as national property. This has led to a cat-and-mouse game between treasure hunters and authorities. What evidence exists for Golden Lily beyond anecdotal accounts? There are some compelling data points. First, we know for certain that the Japanese did systematically loot occupied territories. This is well-documented historical fact. Second, We know they had access to extensive tunnel systems and underground facilities in the Philippines, many built by forced labor and POWs. Third, there are documented cases of smaller Japanese treasure caches being found in the Philippines over the years, though nothing on the scale suggested by the Golden Lily legend. Some historians are skeptical of the more elaborate Golden Lily claims, arguing that the logistics of hiding such vast amounts of treasure would have been nearly impossible, especially as Japan's military situation became desperate. They suggest the legend has grown over time, with each retelling adding more tunnels, more gold, and more treasure. Others point out that treasure hunting has become a cottage industry in the Philippines, with dozens of groups digging in remote areas based on old maps, deathbed confessions from former Japanese soldiers, and psychic visions. The vast majority of these expeditions find nothing, which skeptics say proves the treasure doesn't exist. But then there's the nagging question: where did all that looted wealth go? The Japanese definitely stole it. Much of it has never been accounted for. And the Philippines, as Japan's major base in the final years of the war, would have been a logical place to hide it. In recent years, some researchers have used ground-penetrating radar and other modern technology to search for hidden chambers. They've found anomaly spaces underground that could be tunnels or chambers, but bringing them to light would require major excavation efforts that the Philippine government has been reluctant to authorize. The Golden Lily mystery intersects with another historical question. What happened to treasure looted by the Japanese from specific locations? For instance, when Japan occupied Singapore in 1942, the British destroyed some of their gold reserves rather than let them fall into Japanese hands, but a significant amount was captured. Where did it go? Similar questions exist for treasure looted from China, particularly from temples and imperial palaces. Perhaps the most intriguing aspect of the Golden Lily legend is that it's exactly the kind of operation that would have appealed to the Japanese military mindset of the time. The idea of hiding treasure for later recovery fits with Japanese strategic planning in other areas. They built secret supply caches throughout the Pacific Islands, hidden ammunition dumps, and underground facilities. Why not treasure vaults as well? Whether billions in gold bars still sit in sealed chambers beneath the Philippine jungle, or whether Golden Lily is an elaborate myth that has taken on a life of its own, remains one of World War II's most contested mysteries. What's certain is that something happened to the vast wealth looted by Japanese forces, and until all of it is accounted for, treasure hunters will continue to dig in the hills of the Philippines, dreaming of the ultimate find. The disappearance of the USS Indianapolis. The sinking of the USS Indianapolis is one of the most tragic stories of World War II, but what happened after the ship went down became one of the war's greatest controversies and mysteries. This wasn't just a ship that was sunk, it was a ship whose crew was left floating in shark-infested waters for 5 days because no one knew they were there. And the reason no one knew raises disturbing questions about command failures and possible cover-ups. The USS Indianapolis was a Portland-class heavy cruiser that had served with distinction throughout the Pacific War. In July 1945, she was given a top-secret mission: transport components of the atomic bomb to Tinian Island, from where B-29 bombers would carry the weapon to Japan. On July 26th, the Indianapolis successfully delivered the bomb components and then set off for Leyte Gulf in the Philippines for training operations before the planned invasion of Japan. The ship was traveling alone, without an escort, a decision that would later be questioned. On July 30th, just after midnight, a Japanese submarine, I-58, spotted the Indianapolis. The submarine commander, Mochitsura Hashimoto, fired 6 torpedoes. 2 struck the Indianapolis on her starboard side. The first torpedo blew the bow off. The second hit near the ammunition magazine, causing a massive explosion. The ship sank in just 12 minutes. Of the 1,196 men aboard, approximately 900 made it into the water alive. But they had no time to launch lifeboats or send a proper distress signal. Most of the men who went into the water had only life jackets, if that. They gathered in groups, trying to stay together in the darkness. What happened next was a nightmare. The survivors floated in the Philippine Sea under the brutal tropical sun. They had no fresh water, little food, and no shelter. Many were injured from the explosions. As the hours turned into days, dehydration, sun exposure, and saltwater poisoning took their toll. Men began to hallucinate, drinking seawater, which only accelerated their death. And then there were the sharks. The Indianapolis had gone down in waters known to be frequented by oceanic white-tip sharks, one of the most aggressive shark species. With hundreds of men in the water, many bleeding from wounds, the sharks came. Survivors reported seeing sharks circling constantly, pulling men under. At night, the screams of men being attacked echoed across the water. The exact number of men killed by sharks versus those who died from exposure, drowning, or injuries is impossible to determine. Estimates suggest anywhere from a few dozen to nearly 150 men were killed by sharks, making it potentially the worst shark attack incident in history. But here's where the tragedy becomes a mystery and a scandal. The Indianapolis wasn't supposed to be alone and undefended. The Navy had intelligence that Japanese submarines were active in the area. The ship should have been traveling in a zigzag pattern to avoid submarine attack, but evidence suggests it was traveling in a straight line. And most crucially, no one seemed to notice the ship was missing. The Indianapolis was expected to arrive at Leyte Gulf on July 31st. When it didn't arrive, no one sounded an alarm. The port authorities assumed the ship had been delayed or rerouted. The command that had dispatched the Indianapolis assumed it had arrived safely. Due to a combination of bureaucratic confusion, poor communication, and the fact that the Indianapolis was under top-secret orders, no one noticed for days that a heavy cruiser with over 1,000 men aboard had vanished. The survivors were finally spotted by pure chance on August 2nd, 4 days after the sinking, when a Navy pilot on routine patrol happened to fly over the area and spotted the men in the water. Even then, the rescue effort was chaotic. It took another full day to pick up all the survivors. By the time the rescue was complete, only 316 men were pulled from the water alive. The Navy's response to this disaster was to find a scapegoat. They chose the Indianapolis's captain, Charles McVay. In November 1945, McVay was court-martialed on charges of failing to zigzag to avoid submarine attack and failing to order abandoned ship in a timely manner. This was highly unusual. McVay was the first U.S. Navy captain to be court-martialed for losing his ship in combat in World War II. The trial was controversial from the start. The Navy brought in Commander Hashimoto, the Japanese submarine commander who had sunk the Indianapolis, to testify. Hashimoto testified that zigzagging would have made no difference, he would have sunk the ship anyway. Despite this testimony, and despite evidence that McVay's actions were reasonable given the circumstances, he was convicted of failing to zigzag. The conviction was a travesty. McVay was not responsible for the intelligence failures that put his ship in danger without warning. He was not responsible for the breakdown in communication that left his crew floating in the ocean for 4 days. He was not responsible for the Navy's failure to notice that one of its ships had disappeared, but he made a convenient scapegoat, allowing the Navy to avoid examining its own systemic failures. McVay was restored to duty and retired at his proper rank of Rear Admiral, but the conviction haunted him. He received hate mail from families of the dead for years. In 1968, at the age of 70, Charles McVay took his own life. He was found on his front lawn, having shot himself. He was still holding a toy sailor that his grandson had given him. The survivors of the Indianapolis never blamed McVay. They knew the real failures lay elsewhere. For decades, they campaigned to have his name cleared. Finally, in 2000, Congress passed a resolution exonerating McVay. President Clinton signed it into law. It came 32 years too late for McVay himself. But the mysteries surrounding the Indianapolis don't end there. Why was the ship sent alone through waters known to have submarine activity? The official explanation was that the ship's speed, it could make 30 knots, was considered sufficient protection. But other capital ships were routinely given escorts. Was someone trying to save time at the expense of safety? Why did it take 4 days for anyone to notice the ship was missing? The Navy's explanation involves a complex series of miscommunications and assumptions, but many historians find it hard to believe that a major warship could simply disappear and no one would notice for days. Some have suggested that in the chaos of the war's final weeks, with Japan on the verge of surrender, Navy procedures had broken down more than anyone wanted to admit. Was the court-martial of McVay a deliberate attempt to cover up systemic failures? The timing is suspicious. The trial took place quickly, before anyone could examine too closely why the Indianapolis had been put in such a vulnerable position. By focusing attention on McVeigh's actions, the Navy avoided scrutiny of the decisions made by higher command. There's also a darker theory that's been suggested by some researchers, that the Navy knew the Indianapolis was in danger, but considered the risk acceptable given the ship's mission to deliver the atomic bomb components. Under this theory, speed was prioritized over safety because every day of delay meant one more day before the bomb could be used. The Indianapolis succeeded in its mission. The atomic bombs were dropped, and Japan surrendered shortly after. By that calculus, the ship's loss, however tragic, was an acceptable price. This theory has never been proven, and many historians reject it, but the questions it raises about command decisions have never been fully answered. What we know for certain is that the loss of the USS Indianapolis represents a perfect storm of bad luck, bad decisions, and bureaucratic failure. The ship ran into a Japanese submarine in the vast Pacific Ocean. Bad luck. It was traveling alone without escort despite intelligence about submarine activity. Bad decision. No one noticed it was missing for 4 days. Bureaucratic failure. And when things went wrong, the Navy blamed the captain rather than examining its own systemic problems. Institutional cowardice. The story of the USS Indianapolis survivors is one of incredible courage and endurance. The men who spent 4 days in the water, watching their friends die of wounds, exposure, and shark attacks, and who still had the will to survive, demonstrated the kind of resilience that's hard to imagine. Their testimony about those days is harrowing: men going mad from drinking seawater, life jackets failing, and men drowning in sight of their shipmates. The constant presence of sharks waiting for any sign of weakness. Today, the wreck of the USS Indianapolis lies approximately 18,000 feet below the surface of the Philippine Sea. It was located in 2017 by a team led by Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen. The discovery brought some closure to the survivors and families of the crew. The ship has been declared a war grave, and it's illegal to disturb it. The Indianapolis disaster led to changes in Navy procedures regarding ship tracking and emergency communications. It should never have been possible for a major warship to disappear without anyone noticing. The systems put in place after the Indianapolis helped ensure such a failure wouldn't happen again. But the human cost of those systemic failures, 880 men dead, many dying in the most horrible circumstances imaginable, can never be undone. And the shadow that hung over Captain McVeigh for 23 years until he took his own life represents another casualty of the disaster. A man who did his duty, but was sacrificed by his own service to avoid uncomfortable questions. We've journeyed through World War II's most captivating mysteries, from Nazi treasure hidden in Austrian lakes to America's secret ghost army that defeated Germans with rubber tanks and sound effects. From the USS Indianapolis Tragedy covered up by the Navy to billions in Japanese gold that might still be buried in Philippine jungles. Some of these stories are proven facts that were deliberately hidden for decades. Others remain unsolved mysteries where the truth may never be known. And that's what makes World War II endlessly fascinating. It was so vast and chaotic that countless secrets were lost, treasures were hidden, and incredible stories were buried. The war ended 80 years ago, but ships are still being discovered on the ocean floor, documents are still being declassified, and mysteries are still waiting to be solved. Lake Toplitz may still hold Nazi secrets beneath its dark waters. Golden Lily's treasure could still be waiting in hidden tunnels. History isn't just about the past, it's about the search for truth that continues today. Thanks for watching, and keep questioning everything.